When did you join the military?
I joined the late enlistment program September 1974.
And what part or which branch did you join?
I joined the United States Air Force.
And how long were you in training before deployment?
My first school, the first job I had was 7 weeks. Well, basic training was 8 weeks, and then school was 7 weeks.
And were you deployed to Vietnam first?
No, I didn't serve in Vietnam. While I was in technical school after basic, my orders for Vietnam were revoked because the war was ending, so I did not go to Vietnam.
So what was your first deployment then?
I'm trying to remember, my first deployment was actually up on a mountain north of Fairbanks, Alaska, to protect the airspace all over Alaska. It was during the Cold War.
Okay. And from there, where did you go?
From there, I went to Eglin Air Force Base, where my 2 children were born, and I worked in airfield management. I also went to Herbert Field, Florida, which is another base next to Eglin, and worked in airfield management, and really enjoyed that. That was one of my favorite places to go because I like to get off work at night and go to the beach.
From there, how long was your military career?
I did a career just short of 38 years, retiring in the end of June of 2012.
And where did you spend most of that time?
Most of my career was in the Air National Guard out in Terre Haute. It was the 181st Fighter Wing, and then it became the 181st Intelligence Wing when we lost the aircraft under base realignment. And so did about 22 years of my 38-year career in the Air National Guard.
Were you ever deployed to a combat zone?
Yes, sir.
Which one?
Well, I've been to Bosnia, been to Iraq, been to Afghanistan, and I've done some other in and out ones that are still classified.
Okay. Describe your time in Bosnia.
Bosnia was right after 9/11, and that was a time when the war between the Bosnians and the Serbians was coming to a close, and the NATO put together a peacekeeping operation of 19 countries, and our job was to help keep stabilization in that country. And our job was we were very ingrained in with the local communities and helping them to reestablish peace and law and order. And I was in the command post in that job, so I had direct involvement with the senior military leadership as to what was going on and who was going at, where the different convoys were. We had a lot of convoys going out at that time, and to this day there's still no civilian commercial aircraft landing in Bosnia. Everything is over land. But that was at a period of time right after 9/11 where a lot of the terrorists had fled to that area, and a lot of the soldiers and the airmen and the Marines that I was working with were out on convoys looking for these people.
And then how long were you in Bosnia?
90 days.
And then from there, was it directly into Iraq, or?
No, I came back for a while and did some assignments here in Indiana, and then I did some TDYs in other areas, and then I did some short out and backs to other countries. I didn't do any long-term deployments like what you hear about nowadays.
Yeah.
You're in and out.
Okay. Through your career in the military, what was kind of your most average day?
Well, that's hard to say because I had 5 different jobs. I can't even begin to describe. An average day in the last 8 years of my career was pretty hectic because we started up a combat unit from scratch. That was traditionally an active duty type unit, and they were experimenting, letting the Air National Guard try one out. So we started bare bones with nothing but 5 people, a little bit of money, and a pole barn. And we went from that to a very sophisticated newly built structure, getting all the people we needed, getting them through all the schooling they needed, getting all the equipment they needed, and then them being deployed in different locations at different times. So I got to see from startup to all the way to fully combat ready in my last several years of my career, and that was quite challenging.
It sounds pretty amazing, no? Through what was kind of some of the most tense moments of your career?
I would say 9/11, September 11th, 2001. I was a traditional citizen soldier, Air National Guard, going to my civilian job at the U.S. Postal Service. I can still remember sitting in my cubicle, ready to do my job, and somebody made a comment, "Hey, check out this TV." We had a little TV in the break room, and we saw an airplane hit this one building. And I remember hearing my phone ring, and I went and answered it, and it was the base commander saying, "Get my you-know-what to the base as soon as possible." And I can still remember from that point, I didn't sleep. I was on duty for 38 to 42 hours before I got a chance to get some sleep. As I understand it, I was the first guards person called up in Indiana.
And obviously, I would imagine it was a very tense moment.
It was. There was a lot of unknown. There were a lot of intel telling us that there were multiple attacks threatened. We had to provide, we had viable intelligence that the Sears Tower in Chicago was going to be hit. So we had to help coordinate fighter aircraft circling that huge skyscraper 24 hours a day. We also had to help coordinate fighter aircraft support for Air Force One, because George Bush was President Bush at the time, was traveling all over the United States, hopscotching around for security reasons, and we had to make sure that every time Air Force One took off, there was at least 2 aircraft ready to fly support. And we had to continuously monitor that process.
So did you yourself ever fly?
I never piloted. I didn't have a pilot license.
Okay.
Most of us in the Air Force support the few that do get to fly it.
Yeah.
But I did a lot of support.
With kind of looking at your time in service, was there ever or actually let me back up. Why did you join the military? Was it a draft? Was it your decision? Or?
I can still remember, I was very proud of my father. He was a highly decorated Army chaplain from World War II and Korean War, and I knew that he had been a chaplain to General George Patton, which I didn't understand a lot about that until 2 years before he passed away, but that was always in the back of my mind. And when the Vietnam War was going, a lot of people were being drafted, and even though I had a very successful job in rock music, I chose to join the military. I wanted to do something for my country. So I joined and said, got drafted. I didn't want to be drafted. So I picked the branch of service. If I was going to be drafted, I was probably going to go in the Army and be an infantry. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something else. I wanted to be able to work on my education. And so I picked the Air Force, and it worked out real well.
Obviously, you said you retired in 2012.
Yes.
What have you done since then?
Well, when I retired, I pursued coursework at Purdue University as a master gardener, and that's sort of my therapy, working with flowers and making the downtown area of Greenfield look beautiful. It gives me a lot of pleasure, and it takes my mind off of what I've seen and done. I've also done some bodyguarding for the mayor of Indianapolis. I also work on an armed security team. I also work for, used to be called Gannett Government Media, but I deliver military weekly periodicals to the VA hospital and the commissary, the Post Exchange, and to the Finance Center. So just little things to keep me busy and keep my mind preoccupied. I'm not one that can sit well at home by myself. I like to be doing something.
Is there anything about your time and experience in the military or military in general that you think is important for young people or all people to remember or know?
Yeah, since it's a limited time for this interview, I'm going to focus on one item right now, and that is most people want to go in. I hear not a lot of people, young people, want to go in because of the educational benefits through the GI Bill. And by the way, the American Legion authored the GI Bill, and I'm very proud to tell you that. It's been my experience, many people that have come in and that was their goal, usually wind up cycled out for one reason or another within 1 to 3 years. They just don't make it. Your heart has to be in the right place. Like my heart when I went in, I wanted to serve my country. My dad did, so I wanted to serve my country. But I can tell you story after story of people, young people, a little older than you or your age, that all they wanted to do was get a free education. They read about it and, oh yeah, I'd get free education, and they usually don't make it. In other words, if your heart's not in it for the reasons of what you do in the military, you're probably not really the right person for that job. I mean, it's great to have the education, but provided for you by the VA, but when you put the uniform on, that should come first.
When did you join the military?
I joined the Indiana National Guard in 1967 and went to basic training, infantry training, and to the airborne school to jump out of planes. Then I returned to Indianapolis and resumed with the National Guard company that was based in Greenfield, Indiana. And that included men from that area of the state and some from Indianapolis, Greenfield, Muncie, Marion, those areas. So it was mainly central Indiana men in the unit.
Okay. And when was your first deployment and where?
We actually went to training in the Panama Canal Zone for 2 weeks, and we became jungle experts. And then a few months after that, we were activated, as they called it back then. The Department of Defense activated our unit, National Guard infantry type unit, for duty during the Vietnam War. We were the only infantry type unit activated from any National Guard from any state. Okay. There are other National Guard units activated, but they were mainly support in a couple of artillery. So we went to Fort Benning, Georgia. We went to special training there, ranger training, Pathfinder training, radio school. Prepared very well for December 27th. We were on Air Force planes going to Vietnam. And we landed at near Saigon at the Tan Son Nhut Air Base. And from there we were taken to our base camp, where we remained there our entire tour, still as a unit, which was unique. That was rarely done. We were kept as a unit. We did have some men assigned to us, put in our unit, that were regular Army and draftees. All of them airborne qualified. All of them volunteered to go to airborne school and to join a ranger company. We served in Vietnam for short of a year. We, during that time, were the most decorated Army unit in Vietnam. We had over 200 men. More than half of us were awarded Purple Hearts. We conducted, I think, about 600 plus missions between all of us. We're very well decorated, and we're significant because of that too.
And what job did you have while in Vietnam?
I was on a team. First, I carried the radio. So I was the RTO with communications from the team to the command ship or relay back to the base area. Our mission was to be dropped off into the jungle, 6-man teams. We would then find enemy trails or walking paths. We would set up on these trails, and if a small group of the enemy came by, we would attack them. We would search our bodies for documents that would indicate what units they were in, since the enemy didn't have uniforms with patches and insignias. So that's how Army intelligence would know what units are in what areas. We were never near cities, we were always in the jungle searching for the enemy.
And you said you were there for about a year.
Almost a year.
What was a typical day like in that year?
A typical mission will be to be dropped off for 5 days, and then back to the base camp for 2 days to clean up and get ready to go back out. So if we had a firefight, we would be brought back after the firefight, and then we'd clean up and go back out the next day. Back at the base camp, they tried to keep us busy so we wouldn't get into trouble. They really had difficulty keeping us busy because we got into a lot of trouble. We call it mischief. The Army called it more than that, destruction, disobedience, things that they like to call. But we didn't do much back at the base camp, just small details around the area.
How often would you get into a firefight?
Some of the teams fairly often, some teams not so often. I was in about 8 contacts, firefights, and that was a little less than average. Probably some more teams had a few more than that. We were in enemy territory, and it wasn't hard to find them.
When you got out of time in Vietnam, how was your reception at home?
We came back mainly as a unit in Air Force back to Fort Knox, Kentucky. We didn't have to go through San Francisco or those areas where the troops coming home were disrespected. We came back to a nice welcome. We were brought to Indianapolis, and there was a ceremony for us downtown Indianapolis with the governor, the mayor, and other city leaders, and we were all given additional medals from the state, and we'd already received the medals from the Vietnam War in country. And we got some additional medals. We were in a parade. They had a special parade just for us, and you didn't find that anywhere. We were very fortunate to be treated that way, much better than most of the troops that came home that were treated poorly.
What did you do after your time in the military?
6 months after I got home, I married my girlfriend who had waited for me through that time, and I went to IUPUI and on the GI Bill, started work in the property management area, property manager, property management supervision, and I was in that about 30 years, 25 of which with the same company, and I retired from them.
Is there anything during your time in the war, or the war in general, that you think is important for people to remember?
Well, there's several things. The war is a last resort. It's been the same for warriors throughout history that will come back with post-traumatic stress disorder. Those stressful situations change people. It changed me, which I did not recognize for quite a while. When I did, I got into therapy, and I've been in therapy for over 25 years. Monthly, I get help for my difficulties, but I'm much better now. Better with my family, better with my friends, better in public, because it's difficult to come back from war not being changed. If you're in combat, under threat, that changes you. Same as natural disasters or abuse. It's a traumatic event, it changes you. And I push veterans to get help. I found that very worthwhile for me, and I know it will be worthwhile for them, but veterans are very stubborn, and it's hard to convince a lot of them. But with my work with the Veterans of Foreign Wars here in Carmel, we do that.
When did you join the military?
2007,
And which branch did you join?
Air Force.
How long were you in training before you went on duty?
Basic training was 6.5 weeks, and AIT was, I think it was 13 weeks,
And how long were you in the military?
8 years.
And what did you do during that time?
I was military police.
What, kind of explain, what does that entail?
Interior and exterior patrol. When I worked at my base, we would do patrol of our base. I would do law enforcement, just any type of police duties, I guess.
And where were you deployed?
Kirkuk, Iraq.
Okay. And were you there the whole 8 years, or?
No, I was just there for 6 months in 2009.
Okay. And I guess kind of walk through a typical day while you were there.
I would get up at about 4:45, 5 o'clock, go to breakfast, then we would walk to guard mount. We would find out what was going to happen during the day, then we would arm up, and then we would be bused to our stations. I would either be in a Hummer being driven around, just being driven around the base, patrolling the base, or I would be in a tower overlooking the base with a heavy machine gun, just watching for, it was 12-hour shifts. And then we would be bused back to where we armed up. We would put our machine gun up, but we would keep our sidearm, and we would walk back to our where we slept. That was about it. It would be like basically a 14-hour day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
During that time, were you in any combat situation?
No, we were able to volunteer to go off base, but I was never picked to go. So.
Fair enough. When you got out of the military, what did you do?
Well, I was out in September of 15, and I was medically retired because I developed narcolepsy and PTSD and a bunch of other stuff. So I am unemployable. So since then, I haven't had a job. I sleep basically the opposite of what a normal person sleeps. So I am up about 6 to 8 hours a day. Yeah, so I haven't worked since then. So I do volunteer stuff and things like this. My father's here as well, so.
We appreciate you being here. I guess, what is something about either your experience or the military in general that you think is important for people to remember or know?
Just the duty. I want my son to know that me and my father is providing a future. I didn't join until I was 30 years old. I was a reservist because I was too old to be active duty. But I got hired on active duty because there was a position at Grissom Air Force Base to be, it's called an AGR. So I actually got in to be active duty, which helped me out. and being active duty is now provided my son to have college education. If I get 100% medical, it's going to provide him with medical benefits. I have medical benefits, and with my father receiving his Purple Heart, it provided me with 4 years college education. But the protection of the nation with our veterans, it just, I mean, we wouldn't be sitting here today if it wasn't for that. I mean, it just, and the people I knew in the military, the people that we met when I was in Iraq, they weren't all bad. I mean, the citizens there, it was a good experience. It was hard leaving my son for 6 months. I mean, that was the hardest part. We were in danger, but it wasn't like my dad when he was over in Vietnam. But it was tough, but not what he went through.
When did you begin your service?
I enlisted in the Army in 1966, June, I believe it was.
And what were you assigned?
Initially, after going through basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia, and advanced individual training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, I volunteered for Vietnam.
Okay.
And was sent over there to serve with the 1st Cav Division in a place called On K.
And then from On K, where did your story take you?
Well, On K was kind of our base camp, so they would take us out if there was an operation going on. Like I said, I was in the artillery, and if they needed artillery support for an operation, they'd take us and set us down in the middle of the jungle, wherever we were needed to support the thing. And after a little while, we'd get to come back to base camp and recuperate a little bit.
Okay, and approximately how many of these missions do you think you went on?
Oh, probably 100 or more. I don't know. There were a lot of them. They'd usually only last a few days, and then the operation would be over. There weren't a lot of pitch battles in Vietnam, and even some of the pitch battles only lasted a few days, and then we'd have to go someplace else.
We were talking earlier about the story of your kind of last day. Would you mind?
No, we were at a place they just basically dropped us out in the middle of the boondocks. We were supposedly on the edge of VC Hill territory. The night we got hit, the South Vietnamese, some of them ran, the others turned on us from inside, while the North Vietnamese hit us from outside. First thing they did was shoot our machine gun bunker guards, so we had no perimeter defense at all. Normally, I was in the Fire Direction Center, which is where we figured the data to tell the cannons to fire. Normally, they put us in the center, and we have some time after the rocket and mortar attack before ground assault, because we're protected by the perimeter. In this particular case, there was no perimeter, A, because our bunker guards were all killed, and B, because the South Vietnamese were already inside and turned on us. So they hit us very, very badly. We lost 13 killed and everybody else wounded. I personally was wounded 9 times, once in the arm, once in the head, and the rest in the legs. We fought for 5 hours after my initial wounds before we got any medical assistance at all. So it was kind of a harrowing night for everybody.
And kind of walk us through the rest of that night.
Well, like I said, the bunker was hit with rockets, mortars, and things were just coming in. Plus, they were going by, just firing M16s in, throwing grenades in. How anybody lived through it is amazing to me, and I have my own beliefs as to why I lived through it. But again, we fought. Eventually, our bunker caught fire, and we had to drag our other troops out of the bunker into our sleeping area, which was a tent. We set up a perimeter defense there, just me and this lieutenant, just in case they came back. But they pretty much thought they were finished with us, and they'd moved on to the firing battery. I believe, and I don't know for a fact, but I believe our own artillery opened up on us because they could see that there was activity up there, and they knew that the enemy was not there anymore, or had gone through us, and figured that they were firing from there. So they turned our own artillery on us, I think. In my delusionary state, I thought, well, I'm the only one left alive, and rather than come and get me, they're using my own artillery against me. Later, rational thinking, I realized they probably just thought we were all dead, and they opened fire on us and killed the lieutenant that was assisting me in doing the perimeter defense. So we just stayed that way for a number of hours, and finally things quieted down. We got gunships in and fought them off, I guess, whatever happened. I crawled over the sandbags, was going for help. Next thing I remember, somebody's telling me to go get on the chopper. And I said, no, I'm going to help you get my people out. He said, your people are gone. We didn't even know you were back here. We found you by accident. So evidently I had passed out right after going on sandbags. So I got up and got on the chopper and was medevac to the hospital. There was a South Vietnamese soldier that was trying to get on the chopper, and I strongly encouraged the machine gunner to kill him, and he wouldn't because he was a South Vietnamese soldier and he didn't know what had happened. So he didn't, and I tried my darndest to push him out of the
my shipmates used to call me Wild Bill. I have no idea why, other than the fact that the first time we got into a place called Olongapo in the Philippines, and we were on liberty, there were 6 young officers all together, and everybody started getting drunk. And there was a curfew, so I thought maybe I should stay sober and get them all back in time for the curfew, and we made the curfew. The following morning when they were all waking up, they're going like, where's Reisa, Wild Bill, you know. So anyway, that's talk. Sort of like calling a bald guy curly or a fat guy tiny, you know. They called me wild because I wasn't. But anyway, you want to know about Vietnam as far as I'm concerned. I grew up in Chicago, and I had a pretty rough experience growing up. When it came time for me to go to college, I went to Western Illinois University, and I had completed 2 years in 1964 when the Tonkin Gulf incident occurred. And I had been thinking really seriously about trying to get into the military because it seemed to me like it would be a great idea, a great way to start out life, getting not only the veterans benefits but also the experience. Because when you got that college degree, you know, your sheepskin, well, yeah, the employer looks at that and say, great, what have you done, right? Yeah. Okay, and the military gives you the experience. So when the Tonkin Gulf incident occurred, I got more interested in, and at the time it was August 1964, and I was working, trying to get money to go back to college for the next year. And I talked to a recruiter, and he said, you know, you can enlist, and then with 2 years of college, you could get into this program where you get your commission and your wings as a naval flight officer. Nothing guaranteed, but it might happen. And so I said, okay, I'll roll the dice. And just before I went to boot camp, I went to an air show at Glenview Naval Air Station, and I saw all the performances. And one of them was Captain Dick Tram, who was known as the Flying Professor. And he flew by the grandstand there in a Cessna 150, got out of the aircraft in the air, stood on the main mount and a wing strut, and waved at everybody while he's flying the aircraft from outside the aircraft. Anyway, when I got into boot camp, I became what's known as the RCPO, Recruit Chief Petty Officer, which sounds like that's a great deal. Well, it isn't. It's probably the worst thing that can happen to you, because you get to carry this cutlass, and you call cadence for everybody while you're marching. You got to salute all the officers with the cutlass, and if anything goes wrong, no matter what happens in the class, if somebody shows up late for muster, it's your fault. If somebody flunks a test, it's your fault. No matter what happens. So on the first or second day, we took a bunch of tests, and I think it was the third or fourth day. We're sitting in a classroom, and Chief's up at the front, and we're all facing that way, of course. And we hear somebody open the hatch in the back and start walking in. And the Chief looks at me, he looks at me and says, yell attention on deck. So I yelled attention on deck, we all got up. And here comes this officer, we're striper captain. Looks like a colonel in the Air Force, the Army. And he says, which one is Reisa? And she says, he is. I'm like, okay, now what kind of trouble am I in, right? And he looked at me and he says, you know who I am? I said, oh yes sir, you're Captain Dick Schramm, you're the flying professor. And he said, are you interested in naval aviation? I said, oh yes sir. He said, how'd you like to go down to vet school and become a naval flight officer? I said, I would, sir. He said, be at my office in a Liberty uniform in an hour. I said, aye, aye, sir. And the chief came over to me and he said, give me the cutlass. And he took the cutlass and he gave it to another guy. He says, you're now the RCPO, Reisa. You get the Liberty uniform, go to Captain Schramm's office. I said, where's Captain Schramm's office? And he told me, and he said, incidentally, Reisa, if you pull this off and get your commission and your wings, I will send you that cutlass. And that cutlass is in my den right now. I went off, it took a year and a half to go through all the schools and get my commission and my wings. But in December of '65, they sent me over to my squadron, VAW-13, which was in California, and they had a detachment in the Philippines. And after a couple of months of training in Alameda, I went out to the Philippines and started flying. And I flew 144 combat missions. The aircraft that I was in, the A-1 Skyraider, guns that were shooting our guys out of the sky. So it was a very tense kind of a job. I mean, I felt responsible if somebody got hurt. And we normally, excuse me, we normally double cycled. That is, an aircraft carrier cycle is an hour and a half. They launch about 40% of their birds. An hour and a half later, they launch another 40%, and then recover the ones that launched an hour and a half earlier. We normally double cycled 3 hours in the air, 2 targets, and occasionally triple cycled. I got 312 times over the target. And our job was to be in the main lobe of the radar. And that big dish that you see, that's not for transmitting, that's for listening. Because the radar, people think it's, shines out this radiation and it bounces back. Well, it's not like shining a flashlight into a mirror. What happens is a pulse of electronic energy goes out. It sets up a vibration in a metal object out there. And that metal object then re-radiates that energy in all directions. What's coming back is real small. And that's what the big antenna is for, listening. Excuse me. It's not a cold. Sinuses. Anyway, years later I found out that they consider that a suicide mission. Because in order to be in the main lobe of the radar, to jam, we had to be where the guns were pointed. And so they may not be shooting at us, but they were shooting in our direction. And 312 times I was under fire, about 5 minutes. When I got back from Vietnam, and I mean, in addition to the 312 times over the target, I was on an aircraft carrier, the USS Forrestal. I've been on 8 different aircraft carriers. Ranger, Intrepid, Oriskany, Constellation, Coral Sea, Hancock, Forrestal, Enterprise, plus the Marine Corps station at July, which I got sworn into the Marine Corps during my second tour. When I got back, we got spit on. And I mean, when I first got back, I was assigned to Memphis. I was injured, and they had a hospital there, and that Naval Air Technical Training Center, Memphis, had a billet for me, so they sent me there, and I was a battalion commander. Sounds really impressive. It wasn't much. I'd go to the office and sign the request checks if somebody wanted to order paint or swabs or something. And if somebody did something good, I got to congratulate them. If they did something bad, I was going to chew them out. I had 12 companies, all led by company commanders, who all were chiefs, and they took care of everything. So one day I decided to go to, I only had 2 years of college, and there was this Memphis State University, right, which is now University of Memphis. And I went there to register for classes in January of '68. Walked into the middle of a war protest. As I'm going up the stairs into the admin building, a guy got right in front of me. And he looked at me and he said, "That's disgusting." I'm like, what's he talking about? Did I leave a fly open or something? Yeah. He said, "The uniform." I said, "Oh." So I reached over, grabbed him by the crotch of the throat, and I threw him over my shoulder and down the flight of stairs. And then I looked to see who's coming. There were about 30 people up there, and they all just kind of separated, so I went in and registered. Well, the next day, I find out that the guy who I threw down the flight of stairs, and it was only one flight of stairs, but anyway, he complained, called the base, and they put me in what's known as HAC, which is the officer version of the Vietnam report. You could only go to your office, the BOQ, that's Bachelor Officer Quarters, the exchange, and the chapel. That was it. So the next day, 2 days after the incident, I get a call from the Commander Carr, the XO, who said it was a real nice guy, but the ugliest guy you ever saw in your life. And he called me in, told me to come to the admin building and come in the back way. So I'm like, okay, now what? They're going to reduce me to E1, send me to Leavenworth, all that kind of stuff. So I get there, and as I approached, I see this whole bunch of old ladies in long black dresses with pearls and carrying signs, one of which says, "Unfair to Lieutenant Reisa." Okay. And so I go in the back way, and Commander Carr comes up, puts his arm around my shoulder. He says, "Everything's just fine, Bill. Everything is just fine." Okay. And I says, sir. And he said, "Let's go talk to the skipper." So we go out in the hallway, and there's a skipper standing there. He's a tall guy, and there's this little lady shook her finger at him. And it turns out that this was his like third grade teacher or something. And she's bawling him out, and he sees me, and he says, "Bill, tell these ladies everything's okay." I said, "Ma'am, everything is okay. There's no problem." She says, "There isn't. We heard that you were in trouble for that war protest." Well, it turns out that of that 30 people up there on that platform, only about 6 were actually protesting the war. The rest of them were members of the Veterans Club, and they were trying to get these guys to quit protesting the war. Because they weren't really protesting the war, they were protesting the warriors. Well, those guys in the Veterans Club, they went to their friends, the DAR, the Daughters of the American Revolution, who had a museum on Memphis State property. And they said, "Okay, we got to help this guy, right?" And that's what they were from. And they said, "We're having a tea in your honor this afternoon. Can you come?" I said, "I don't think so, ma'am. I got to work." And the skipper says, "Oh, yes, he can come." So I went there, and they had a cake for me, and I got a hand-sewn Defiance flag and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, that's a lot about what Vietnam was all about. They had the war protests back then, and to this day, I have heard people deny that there were any protests, and that they were protesting the war, but not the warriors, but they were spitting on the warriors. At the tail end of World War II, General Eisenhower was going into a couple of concentration camps, Dachau and Sobibor, Auschwitz, and he was seeing, I don't know if he went to Auschwitz, but anyway, he was seeing the Holocaust. And he said, and he was calling people in from the villages around there to make sure that they saw it, and forcing them to help bury the bodies. And he said then, back in 1945, that there will be a time when people will deny that this ever occurred. And sure enough, people are denying that the Holocaust occurred. Well, now the war protesters from Vietnam are denying that that occurred. And they're saying it never happened. Well, it did. I was there. Right now, after President Trump was elected, we had people who were offended by the fact that Trump won the election. And then they started protesting violently in the streets. People have been killed and injured. Property has been damaged. I'll tell you, in 30 years, people will deny that ever happened.
Well, and one of the things we're trying to do here is record. We've heard kind of this morning with you guys you've interviewed that the reception the Vietnam veterans got was atrocious. I mean the people like yourself who put your lives on the line for us were eternally.
I'm an 80% disabled veteran. One of the problems I have is what's called IBS, or irritable bowel syndrome. I was so tense when you get up there and you're trying to jam these radars, which are directing the guns, they're shooting our guys out of the sky. If somebody got hurt, I took it personally. It was my fault. Right? And we had old gear. The aircraft I was in, the A-1 Skyraider, was actually designed and flew during World War II, but it's not called a World War II aircraft because it wasn't delivered to the fleet until 1947. But all the equipment I had was Korean War vintage, and had low power, and we had to get right in the main lobe of the radar in order to jam it. Incidentally, the program I went through, actually the first program, the program I went through was NAO, Naval Air Observer, but the Navy waved its magic wand and made us all NFOs, Naval Flight Officers, which is what those wings are. And then after I got off active duty, I went into the reserves, and I became an NIS agent in the reserves, which was later in 1984 became NCIS. And they found out that you can't have officers as agents in a civilian law enforcement authority because of a law called posse comitatus. So anyway, it was interesting being in NIS. So I then became an agent in my civilian job. And then I was told that you can't be an agent and a reservist at the same time, which turned out to be a lie. So I had already gotten out, but then I went over to the Coast Guard because that seemed like fun. You know, I get to chase dope runners on the weekends. I was doing white-collar crime, fraud detection for the Department of Defense during the week, and so chasing dope runners on the weekends seemed like great fun. And I eventually became a coxswain in the Coast Guard, enlisted, and a retired lieutenant. I tell everybody I'm a retired lieutenant, but I'm a nice guy anyway. I was a chief. And in the history of the world, there's been a grand total of one person who's won both his Naval Flight Officer wings and his Coast Guard coxswain pin. I'm the only, and it can't happen again because they changed the programs a little bit, so you can't do both. You can only do one or the other. Anyway, I'm proud to have served, even though when I came back I got spit on. I was proud to have served when I was getting spit on. And it never changed my mind about whether or not I should serve. I think everybody who is able, physically and mentally, to serve should serve. When my late wife Bonnie got diagnosed with colon cancer, she lived for 5 years. They told her she'd have 3 to 5 years. She had actually 5 years and 3 days. But her expenses were somewhere in the vicinity of $1 million a year between the surgery, the chemo, the radiation treatments, and there was one shot she was getting every other week that was $3,600 for one shot. I got called up to active duty for a couple of days in '81 when Air Florida 90 hit the 14th Street Bridge, and I got pictures of that. I got pictures of me sitting on 90 tons of marijuana. A big bus. It's been very interesting, and that's kind of funny because we brought that boat into it was an ex-Coast Guard cutter, the Amaleka, and we brought it into quiet at Miami. I'm sorry, Key West, and then we went on Liberty that night. Just myself and one other guy. We had these 80 tons of marijuana, or 90 tons of marijuana. I'm sorry, $80 million worth, and we went into this restaurant that was a favorite hangout of Ernest Hemingway. And we go in there, and the waitress comes up and says, "You guys got any stuff?" We said, "Stuff? What do you mean stuff?" She said, "Marijuana. You're in the Coast Guard, aren't you? You're the only guys in here with short hair." And I said, "No, but we just turned over 90 tons. And you could hear a pin drop in the whole restaurant. And I said, "And you know they're charging us $100 a ton to incinerate it up in Jacksonville?" And the guys were like, "I'll incinerate some of it."
Well, is there anything else you'd like recorded?
No, I really encourage people to get into the military at some point. It's an experience that'll help you out later in life. Not just the benefits, but the experience itself. And I also would like to encourage people to get into law enforcement, like I did. I mean, if you get into law enforcement, which isn't easy, but if you do get into law enforcement, you'll never be out of a job. There's plenty of bad guys out there. And in my case, white-collar crime, fraud. I mean, it's like a giant chess game, them against us, and they could win 99 times out of 100. And all I had to do was win once. Turn around, put your hands behind your back, you're under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to